Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started as people come in. Good evening. My name is Kate Meenan-Waugh, and I'm on the board of Solas Nua. And I want to welcome you to the Capital Irish Film Festival at home and tonight's panel discussion of Violet Gibson, the woman who shot Mussolini. I want to thank NYU DC, Tom McIntyre, Polly Theresian, and Solas Nua's Sean Wren for making this evening possible. Before introducing our panelists, let me bring you up to date with what Solas Nua has on offer for the coming weeks. You have only 4 days to see the work of 6 incredible contemporary Irish artists on display at the former Intelsat building and Whittle School in the Van Ness neighborhood of DC. This exhibit, The Space We Occupy, has been curated by our own Miranda Driscoll, and the Washington Post's reviewer Mark Jenkins reminds us the artwork serendipitously speaks to both the past and possible future of the building it is displayed in. We have a play reading of I Girl by Marina Carr at St. Thomas Parish Church, August 7th. And on September 9th and 10th, the premiere of Yes and Yes, a Solas Nua commissioned work by the Liz Roche Dance Company, will be showcased at the Atlas Center for Performing Arts. You can grab some discounted tickets until July 31st. For information on all these events, visit our website, links in the chat, and in general, our social media accounts. And for our filmmakers out there, submissions to the 2023 Capital Irish Film Festival are now being gathered. Okay, so the film. This 90-minute documentary, Violet Gibson, the woman who shot Mussolini, came out in 2020. And we are honored that the producers, Siobhán Lynam and Barrie Dowdall, are with us tonight. As I'm sure we'll learn in tonight's discussion, Siobhán has been deep in this story for some time, having produced a radio documentary of the same title back in 2013. She has a long career as a researcher and collaborator on many films. Barrie's production company, Ned Kelly Pictures, based in Dublin, has done a fine job of bringing the story of Violet Gibson to us all. He also has a long career of documentary filmmaking, which has taken him throughout the world to bring us historical and social interest stories. And leading our panel discussion this evening, we welcome back Dr. Miriam Nyhan Grey, on the faculty of Glucksman House at NYU and producer of This Irish American Life, a weekly public radio program that showcases the work of the Irish and Irish American Studies program at NYU. And that, of course, is just a small sample of where her scholarship brings her, including recently initiating the Black, Brown, and Green Voices to amplify the experiences of people of African and Irish ancestry. So Dr. Grey, Miriam, I'm going to take it over to you to talk about this wonderful film.
Thank you so much, Kate, and to Sean from Solas Nua, and to my great NYU colleagues, Polly and Tom McIntyre as well. It's great to be part of this team to talk about this great film, as you introduced it, Kate, and congratulations to Siobhán and Barrie. It's such a pleasure to share this space virtually with you and to reintroduce or introduce to for the first time this fascinating figure and your wonderful depiction of Violet in your documentary film. I've so enjoyed watching it as I prepared for this evening. So what I have some questions lined up, but by all accounts, Barrie and Siobhán are very welcome, are all up for questions from the audience. So please don't be shy, and we'll keep an eye on the Q&A function there. I have loads of questions for them myself, but please do chime in because we'd love to engage as many kind of questions and angles on this as possible. And maybe I'll dive right in with you guys, and I suppose I've done a little bit of digging, but can you share with us, Barrie and Siobhán, and you could decide who goes first, how you came across this fascinating story of Violet Gibson? It seems as if from the little bit of research I done on her, that her story was largely overlooked by historians, Irish or otherwise, and it's actually in the literary and more creative fields, maybe, that her narrative was recovered. Can you tell us about how you came to it all?
Well, good evening, everybody, from myself and Siobhán. And thank you for having us, inviting us to be here. I suppose really the story started with Siobhán. So because she made the initial radio documentary, I'm going to hand it over to her, and I'll pick up the story later on.
Sounds great.
Well, I suppose just before we start, because Barrie would say we have a habit of interrupting each other. We've been, as I was just saying to you earlier, we've been married for 32 years. We've worked on a lot of collaborations. He's a filmmaker. I have helped out, right? You know, it wasn't necessarily my work. When it came to doing after his work in Australia, right, documentaries that he'd made about these different men, I said, you have to tell the women's story, right? And so you can imagine I'm interested in telling women's stories, right? Or having those, particularly women who have been left out of history or written out of history, right? And some extraordinary stories. I had an opportunity to go to a seminar in RTE, our national broadcaster, right, for the radio documentaries. And I thought, okay, maybe I could make a radio documentary. Maybe Barrie could help me in a radio documentary. And I had various ideas about different extraordinary women and their stories. And I put it to the producer afterwards. And Violet's story, he had never heard, no more than anybody in Ireland, anybody that I spoke to had never heard of the story, or in Italy, right? And I suppose I first came across, they were interested, right? He said, oh, that's an interesting story, right? Never heard about it before. I first heard, not necessarily about Violet, but years back, like when I was at, you know, my university days, I was watching something, you know, Mussolini speaking to the crowds in Piazza Venezia. And somebody said, do you know, an Irish woman tried to assassinate him once? And I said, what? And then I remembered this story, right? And it was always sort of with me. And then I came across the wonderful book by Frances Donner Saunders. And so then I was able to put the proposal, right, when RTE said they were interested, I wrote a detailed proposal and they said, yes, they were interested, and then went on to the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland and got the support to make the documentary. So that's really where it started. But a woman, yeah, I mean, written out of history, but Frances Donner Saunders, I have to say, I mean, her book, and I'd certainly recommend it, it's absolutely extraordinary, and her research is impeccable. And she was just so generous with her research as well. A wonderful woman.
And Siobhán's radio documentary won the New York's World Best History Documentary, won an award. And I kind of thought at this stage that this might make an interesting film. And I approached TG4, that's our Irish language broadcaster, and they, of course, they said, well, put together something. So I used a lot of Siobhán's research. We submitted an initial pitch, and they said, oh, that's very interesting. Go away and do some more work. And then the way the BAI works, look, it's a funding machine, if you like, but you have to get past the broadcaster. So you have to do a lot of work. And as filmmakers, like, you know, you could maybe write a 60, 70, 80 page treatment and it might come to nothing. So it went into the BAI and the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland, and they gave it the go ahead. And that's how it all started, the film.
So you figured that based on the engagement in the radio format, Barrie, that people would, I suppose you'd reach a different type of audience, I suppose, through the medium of film. Yeah,
and I had worked on the radio documentary. I did the sound. Okay. I was doing this field sound, as they call it. And I remember one of the things that struck me when we were in Northampton in the hospital where she had stayed, and we were brought into the archive, and we saw all these boxes of files of all her letters with the stamps on them that were never sent. So that really kind of got me thinking about this poor woman locked up here for nearly 30 years, and how she would have watched the news, because she was an avid reader and she read newspapers, and watching the horror that Mussolini became, and the fact that she was just locked away. And I just thought, wow, we need to tell this film. If I just make it as a visual metaphor, but in the early on in the film, you see her, she's looking out a window, and really that idea was, here she was looking at her older self, and that's where the story started for me visually. You know, I presume people have seen it, but it's in one of the opening shots, and then we hear her like writing, "Dear Mr. Churchill," and all that. She was very coherent in what she was saying. And if you bring in the paratroopers and land them here and whatever, but we don't find out till the end of the film anyway. But those letters were never sent.
Yeah, there's a lot of poignancy in it, Barry, in terms of the story, right? And you do a great job. I think one of the moments that really struck me is when Alwyn is just doing such a nice job of characterizing her reading the newspaper about Mussolini's death even, and just how she must have felt around that as well. You know, I'm a historian, and you know, the context of her family life and the privileged background from which she emerges, and then her conversion to Catholicism, are really key aspects of her life, which you draw out so well throughout the film. Even when it would have been clearly more strategic for her to abandon certain attachments. I mean, you know, the zeal with which her family kind of keep her away from, you know, this idea of her, I think, wanting to go and be in a convent or something, even, you know, when everything is kind of, she's getting older and everything. It's heartbreaking and so nicely done in the film. And we go from quite an insightful Irish in Ireland story in terms of the context of her life into a much more international narrative as her life evolves and she moves to Italy. Can you tell us a little bit about the process by which you decided to build the narrative arc around these themes and her chronology for a film audience, or was it all, you know, dictated by kind of the intricacies of her family life and background?
Can I just say, I mean, just you're saying, I think she'd always a very international perspective. She moved to, I mean, conversion to Catholicism was seen as a perversion, right? And was written in the newspapers as a perversion. And she left Ireland in 1901, went to London, and I suppose, I mean, got, you know, escaped from the family, right? And, but I think she had a real sense of social justice. You know, I mean, that she'd sort of got a bit like to her brother Willie and so on. But she was, you know, anti-war. She was in Paris, you know, working as an anti-war activist, right? She had a perspective, like from the family background, like an international perspective. She was a friend of Rudolf Steiner. She would have gone and done retreats, and, you know, she was interested in this, that, and the other. And she was a wonderful artist herself, right? She was interested in music. So she had a very broad perspective, and she had gone to Italy, you know, first at the age of 10. So it wasn't her just arriving in Italy. She was all the time, I think, had, you know, quite a big perspective. But, you know, how you...
Yeah, in terms of the narrative arc, like there was so much we shot that didn't make the cut. I mean, well, the film was 2 hours long, and it's been cut to 90. So what basically, I started the film at this. Here's this woman. We kind of tease you into this. The woman, like, writing. We hear quotes from Mussolini and other politicians, and then we see her. And then I just decided to make the narrative as straightforward, like her. So that it's got three. You know, the beginning is like she came from this privileged background. She converts to Catholicism. She goes to Rome. She shoots Mussolini, and the rest of her life she's locked up. So we just tried to pick from using Frances Stoner's book, which was incredibly detailed. She had, like, the notes in her book are just, I don't know how she managed to pull it all together. So we had lots of descriptions of how notes she wrote. And so myself and the other writer, Kevin Dalisla, who's also worked with myself and Siobhán, and another person called Ashley, and we put together a screenplay. And then when we were editing, it just sort of flew chronologically, but there was kind of a bit of a reveal at the beginning. This woman shot this guy, which if you remember, there's a scene where you don't see her shooting, but you see this little old woman with a gun, and then we just peel back and the narrative arc went from there. But a lot of scenes got cut, but it was deliberate to kind of beginning, middle, and end. Mm-hmm. But I just said, well, same thing. Like, it was a bit of a hybrid documentary in that we put a lot of effort into the drama scenes, because so many documentaries, it's just like the reenactments just look like wallpaper. You know, it's like something to ease, you know, paper over the cracks. And Alwyn Fuere, I'll stop now, but she was so invested in it, and she's just wonderful to work with, and she really got into Violet. And I didn't have to do much direction. Well, I had to say that I was happy with that, but she was very much invested in the story. So
well, that actually brings me quite nicely to my next question. The casting of Violet, I mean, the film is, you know, all, you know, it's actually, I suppose, a credit to Alwyn, and she's very well known in Irish circles and internationally as an amazing actor. I can't imagine, I guess that's a tribute to her, I can't imagine anyone else in the role. She does such a good job. But could you tell us a little bit about how, was she someone you knew, or I imagine you would have at least maybe known her profile. Was she the first person who sprung to mind in terms of the casting process?
Well, she certainly was the first person who sprung to mind for me, right? I just said, you know, I've known Alwyn, you know, as a stage actor, like years and years ago. I mean, not knowing her personally, but I mean, knowing of her work, and, you know, and I said to Barry, you know, she's the person to play Violet. There were a couple of other people that we were thinking about, but
I had worked with Alwyn. I was going to say I'd worked with Violet. I had worked with Alwyn on one or two small projects, and I hadn't seen her for about 10 years, and I just put together a WhatsApp message, and I just said, Alwyn, this is something I'm working on. You might, I presume you might remember me, and here's a kind of a synopsis or a one-pager. And within 20 minutes, I got this, yes, I want to do it. So that's how it happened. And she was like, that was it, just a text message. And then we had to deal with her agent and do all that sort of stuff, because she is quite a bit of a name now, you know. Mm-hmm. Her like, she's more in more and more films. The most recent film I've seen her in, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Oh wow.
Well, to just give you an idea of the diversity. But yeah, it was Siobhán's idea, and then I asked her, and she said yes.
Yeah, and you can tell that she's really in it, I think, right? And she looks quite like Violet, doesn't she? You know,
Does, yeah.
She's not a million miles away from her. My next question, her brother Willie, who's obviously very important in the early part of her life to her, and I suppose this kind of going back to, I was awkward in how I put that last question before the casting one, Siobhán. I didn't mean to imply that she wasn't international. I suppose what I was kind of getting at was more the kind of early part in terms of her rejection of her kind of privilege of the status of what she was born into and whatever. And, you know, this brings us to Willie, I suppose, who was clearly influential in that vein. But he doesn't go down the same route as Violet in terms of his commitment. Well, I don't know his commitment to social justice and whatever, but it's clear from how you develop it in the film that he doesn't, he rejects her. I mean, basically, right, they all reject her except Constance in the end. Has he gotten more attention than she, do you know? I saw that my colleague Turtle Bunbury talked about his kind of profile in terms of some of the Irish nationalists in the early part of the 20th century, some of the signatories of the Easter Proclamation and Douglas Hyde and those, and then, like, you know, kind of following on from that, the gender dimension to Violet's story, and I can't remember if it was in a review or something, but someone asked the question, you know, what kind of narrative would have existed about Violet and what she did if she had been a man? And you must have thoughts, maybe you could answer the first, and maybe some thoughts on that aspect of her as a woman.
I think Willie, the brother, definitely had an influence on her, you know. And, you know, it was because of him, I think, that she was first interested in Catholicism and that sort of conversion, right? You know, I mean, he converted to Catholicism, right? And it was the modernist movement, right? Where there was like questioning the Pope and so on, right? And also he was involved, right? I mean, he was like doing charitable works and he, you know, gave out alms and around London. And when she was there, when she moved to England, she spent a lot of time with him doing that. And I think that's where she began to, you know, be more political, right? But I think that, you know, while he would have known Constance Markiewicz, right? You know, Constance Gorbuz, and she would have known Ava, right, in London, right, who was involved in sort of like the Labour movement. And I think that's where, like, I mean, she would have then been, I mean, I was going to say that a little later, you know, supported the Labour Party. And her involvement, you know, like that time, I mean, I said like she was anti-war, like she would have known, you know, Emily Pankhurst, and so on and so on. So I think that just gave her just a much broader perspective, and also because of her interest in other like I said, like I mean Steiner and so on. And because she had that allowance, I mean, she travelled. You know, just Willie. I didn't hear that much about Willie much later on. I mean, Francis said like we just thought it was strange that he lived out his Gaeltacht in France, right? And I mean, I
think he kind of fizzled out.
He after, you know, when she was committed and locked up, he never came to see her. He had no contact with her.
He was living in France at that time.
Yeah.
I think that was in 1926. I think he kept living that kind of Irish Gael lifestyle, but he was living in France, and there's not that much about him after those earlier years. So,
but certainly
influenced her.
Yeah, I mean the gender. You know, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure you all are familiar with, you know, history and like his story and her story, right? You know, and like just so many women. I mean, and just now, I mean, this I suppose more of a focus on exploring the lives of women who were so incredibly important, right through history. I mean, we know that, you know, I mean, like half the population, and I think certainly it's gendered. I mean, just like the fact, I mean, Mussolini was absolutely freaked out, right, that it was a woman, right? I mean, the whole thing was she had to be hidden, avoid any publicity, right, or you know, for what she had done, you know, in terms of like just denying her even that. Her family and I think the establishment, you know, were just like she was an embarrassment to her class, but also seen like an embarrassment to her gender. And I think, just how she was, I mean, definitely, as you say, right? I mean, I think that there's obviously how she was seen and how some people said if it was her brother, there probably would be a monument to him. Mm-hmm. You know, but she was an embarrassment.
I'm conscious, I'll just keep an eye on the clock here, but I think what's interesting was like when the trial, etc., which was held in camera, but it was like decided that she better have her mad than bad, and just, you know, rather than see her, she was this dangerous woman. This was what was happening in Rome. So lock her, you get rid of her. And Churchill got involved in that negotiation and stuff, and get her back to England, and that was gone. You know?
But I think, you know, that bit about like a woman, as I said, Mussolini, because everybody wanted to have tea with Mussolini, you know, it was just Mussolini was, you know, the darling of Europe, right? You know, everybody loved him. You know, she was also like difficult for, you know, British, you know, Italian relations, like just disturbing that. But there was no way they were going to give her a public trial, because she could not then be seen as this mad Irish mystic or mad Irish woman. She was a lucid, very intelligent woman, and they could not afford to try her publicly. Yeah. So that was just like, lock her away, get rid of her. You know, this woman is a dangerous woman. Yeah.
I want to just take a question from the audience here, and it's a good one. It's a very powerful scene from Jean Gallagher, and I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. Could you talk about the scene where Violet shoots herself in the room?
Frances Stoner Saunders says she decided to offer herself up for the sins of fascism, and she tried to kill herself and she holds the gun up to her chest. And we know from medical records that the bullet goes in and whizzes around her ribcage and comes out through her shoulder. And she survived. And I think she felt, well, maybe there was, God had something else for her to do. At that time, there was a lot of, in the teachings of that she was reading, I mean, there was a lot of self-sacrifice. And that's, Siobhán might have some other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that she did. Okay, I mean, maybe we get to why did she go to Italy, right? And why did she go with a gun? I think she had, in England, right? I mean, she was an avid reader. Matteotti, who was the leader of the United, Socialist Party in Italy, he was an outspoken critic of Mussolini. Mm-hmm. He came to England, right, and was hosted by the British Labour Party, and he had written a book about, fascist violence, right, the year of fascist violence. And in that documented, right, all of the just horrendous, right, assaults and murders and so on, including of Catholic priests and so on. And obviously Violet would have read this, and it, was very familiar with what was happening in Italy. And when Matteotti himself was murdered, and so brutally murdered, I think that was really the straw that broke the back, with the camel. And she headed off to Italy very soon after that. And she was seen, right, although it was way out in the countryside, this show trial of those who were, had so-called attempted to murder Matteotti, although they knew that Mussolini was behind it. She was seen at that trial. So Matteotti was absolutely paramount, right, in her motivation for going to Italy and doing something about the murder of Matteotti, who was, as I said, the only outspoken critic. But that the sacrifice, I think, people were sacrificing, in Ireland, sacrifice was a big thing, but then, religion sacrifice was a big thing. And I think, as Barrie said, it was like that she would do this, sacrifice herself. But then when that didn't work, I think she just decided then, okay, she'd go for Mussolini, just go for the man himself.
I suppose, Siobhán, in that now you've just answered my next question was, about if you've come to fixed conclusions about what she saw in Mussolini so early on. Is it, all that stuff that you've kind of just touched on, and then culminating in the assassination, the brutal assassination of Matteotti that kind of sends her over the edge. But I suppose more kind of, why is she, well, I suppose what you draw out in the film as well, that it's nicely done the way that you suggest, the voiceover, I can't remember, talks about how the dissent, the level of dissent or ability for people to speak up just diminishes markedly over time as he rises, which is essentially how, dictators manage to do what they do, right? And it's getting to be a colder and colder space for someone to be speaking out, right?
Yeah,
but just for, she definitely set out with the intention. She was well prepared. I mean, she wrote in her notes that she was going to the fascist headquarters, the next Piazza Littorio. So she was heading there. So yeah, she was definitely intended to do it, I think.
I mean, the question that probably hasn't been, fully answered, right? Although there is a lot of, there to suggest that she did have, right? That she might not have been acting on her own, right? Not that she was set up, but that she was part of, right? Like the dissidents, right? That used to meet in Trastevere, right? I mean, the last of the dissidents, that's where, and where would she have got the second gun? And the way, she joked, she says, oh, she got it from, somebody who gave it to her, and she was directed by the dead and by the this and the other. I mean, she's quite, she said, glad that God gave her an Irish tongue to send them around. I mean, she had there's some amazing things that she said while she was, being interrogated. But yeah, I think that she was very clear about what she was doing, right? And whatever way, sacrificing herself or sacrificing herself in whatever way, right, to just rid the world of somebody that she saw as a monster. I think that's what she set out to do.
Yeah, Mary Burke had just asked, you kind of touched on that there, Siobhán. The Sanders book seems to say she was acting alone, while the film suggests it was a conspiracy. I suppose so. It's kind of it's still TBD a little bit, right?
Well,
Yeah.
Frances did say that Frances says in the film, she says, where did she get the gun? You know, I mean, she must have got it. And she intimated that she was hanging out in Trastevere, and it's certainly mentioned in the book too that she was moving with different people who might have influenced her. So,
well, I think that she wanted to do it, but I think she probably wasn't the only one who wanted to do it, right? But she was the one who basically went and did it. Yeah.
How have audiences engaged with the film and reacted to the portrayal of Violet and all that it, you know, invokes in us in terms of how we view how people, how we, you know, we have 2020 vision when we're looking back, right? And she's a very interesting example of, what's it, the canary in the coal mine who wasn't listened to or whatever, you know?
Yeah. I just give you. I have some. I'm just looking at the time, but we have plenty of time. I have some statistics here from the first screening in Dublin. I got the audience figures, and I was very happy when I saw. But anyway, 80% of the audience loved it. 15% said it was good. 3% said it was okay, and 2% said it wasn't for them. And it's been pretty much like that everywhere we go. Like nobody's got. One person walked out out of the screening in Belfast, but maybe the person was going to a meeting. We don't know. But audience have engaged with it.
I think it was interesting in London when we were last there, right?
Not about 6 weeks ago.
And I couldn't get over, because I mean, sometimes, you know, when I watch it again, I think, oh, you know, people just think, oh, you know, particularly the first time, oh, like a history lesson, right? And then you sort of get into the drama, and people were just so enthusiastic, right? I mean, I couldn't believe it, right? And delighted and appreciative of, right? Yeah. And they were saying it's so important, right, that, you know, I mean, you know, that this is happening and that we see this, because look at what's happening today. And, you know, they were making this, many people making the comparison between, you know, Mussolini, right, you know, Mussolini, you know, scything the corn and on horseback and whatever else with Putin. And, you know, saying, right, with, you know, the rise of fascism, the rise of populism, you know, what's happening in Europe. I mean, have we learned anything, and what can we learn from this? So I think just it raises lots and lots and lots of issues for people, right? And again, it's like, what have we learned, and how much have we learned from our history? And I think that's been the general reaction. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to wrap up, just not to take up too much time. It's wonderful to have this opportunity to engage with you on this, and I thank you for your generosity of time and spirit in doing this. You just one last question, I suppose, to close out, which kind of touches on what you've just spoken to there. You open the film with a clip of Donald Trump being called out for quoting Mussolini, and Frances Stoner Saunders closes the film almost with a kind of related sentiment in terms of the relevance of today, or how, you know, and how we think of conflict or upheaval and in societies and cultures, and how they're processed in real time and how we look back at them. Was that choice clear from the outset of the project that you kind of bring in the present in some way?
Not really, but when I was writing up the treatment, I was very conscious of the fact that there was the rise of the right in Europe, like with Le Pen and in Hungary, and et cetera. And I just saw these parallels with like 100 years ago and today. And anyway, we're in the middle of our research. I came across this clip, the clip of Trump talking to the CNBC. And I just, like, some people said, yeah, it's funny, but I don't know if and it was going to be kept in and wasn't going to be kept. But then we found the clip of Mussolini saying, "Make America Great" as well. So we decided to leave it in. And what I thought was so amazing was that here's the president, a future president, quoting a dictator. And I just thought it was, a lot of people laughed at it when they heard him say it, like that he was, I just thought it was kind of incredulous that you would actually be quoting a dictator. And when it was brought to his attention, he was like, oh, he was like surprised. So anyway, and I, well, we all, what's happened since. But,
yeah. Well, I thought
you weren't too keen on it.
No. Well, I wasn't too keen. I'm just thinking like what, might it being suggested. But I mean, I just thought it was very, to see somebody campaigning, to become president of the United States of America, right? And proud to quote Mussolini. I just thought that was quite shocking. And using Mussolini's quotes to appeal to the electorate of the United States. I thought it was quite frightening, really. And as I said, yeah, whether it should stay or go.
There was a lot of debate about it, but we kept it in for the first screening, and we got such a reaction from people that, wow, that was a great clip. So we kept it.
Well, and that's what you want. You want to provoke people a little bit as well, right? So yeah. I think it's a good choice. Listen, I hope I've done. I feel like I haven't done justice with my question.
We could talk for another hour, but anyway.
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful film, and I as a historian interested in Ireland and Europe and the United States and any kind of world history, it's such a great example, such a wonderful recovery of a female voice. And thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have a chat to you this evening about it, Barrie and Siobhán. And please keep up the good work, and I'll hand back over to Kate.
Thank you so much,
Miriam.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
I think we all agree we could listen and go on for quite some time. Such an incredible film. And thank you again, Barrie and Siobhán, for taking the time and staying up and awake, even though I'm sure it's quite beautiful out. And Miriam, as always, thank you for your masterful direction of questions and moderation of the panel.
Could I just say congratulations to you all on your wonderful work, right? And you guys keep it up, right? You women keep it up as well, just absolutely right.
Well, we appreciate that. And again, I'm just going to remind people, if you haven't gotten yourself up to the Van Ness neighborhood here in Washington, DC, 4 days to see 6 incredible artists display their work in the most incredible space. So please check out the website and make sure you get to see the space we occupy. For those of you who live in New York City, this is the same exhibit that was actually at the Irish Art Center. And we are so pleased to be able to have it here in Washington. So again, thank you, Barrie and Siobhán, everyone who tuned in, and we look forward to seeing you at our next CIFF at home in September. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.